Let's get started. My name is Michael. I am from Belgium. I am managing partner at the Collective, and I'm responsible for our identity and security practice over there. We're only 7, so our practice is basically me and just one other guy. But we do this all day long. And today is about our experiences out in the field on how to best, quote unquote, protect the secure modern workplace. Now, what is that modern workplace, right? For me, obviously we're at a Microsoft conference, so we're going to talk Microsoft products and services. That's the M365 stack, right? Windows, the devices that you're having, and all the technologies and features that are available to you to protect your data, access to your environment, and so forth and so on. So why 10 steps? Well, first of all, it sounds really cool on a slide deck. But there's obviously many more. You can carve them up the way you'd like. 2 steps, 5 steps, 25 steps. It really depends. And one thing I figured out while creating this slide deck is there is no particular order in which you can do any of these. It really depends on where you're at today on how to best secure your environment, right? So just keep that in mind when we go through a couple of the steps. Some might make more sense to you to do earlier on in your environment. Some might make more sense later on, right? The way that we've structured them is based on the majority of our engagements where we see this is basically the entire trajectory that we go through. And these are the steps that we typically go through in this order. Just keep in mind it's not set in stone. Now, when I say securing the modern workplace, I don't mean just securing for the sake of securing it, right? Security is great, it is important, it's very necessary, but you have to have a goal where you are working towards to. Today, these days, the goal where you want to work towards to is some sort of zero trust model, right? Obviously, we are assuming that you are using cloud in some way, right? Modern workplace, cloud is an essential part of it for a lot of organizations. But even if you're not in the cloud with some core workloads, the zero trust model makes a lot of sense for basically everyone. Now, what you see on slide is probably a slide that you've seen a couple of times, right? It's an approach to do zero trust from a Microsoft perspective. But what it highlights, and this is basically what I want to get to, is first of all, assume that everything is insecure, that any connection that you have into your environment is originating from an unsecure network, from the internet, or basically anywhere where you do not have control over the device or the network connectivity in the first place. And then before you're giving it access to any resources, whether that is cloud or on-prem, they should go through a rigorous process of being evaluated, right? It doesn't mean that everyone has to go through the same funnel where the process has to be as vigorous as, as always. I mean, some high-level access, let's say email, might be subject to some controls, whereas access to core business intelligence data or some R&D data is subject to more controls and which is more strictly regulated, right? And that middle plane, these access conditions, there's a lot of technologies that we can use within Microsoft's cloud to make that happen. And a lot of these technologies, a lot of these capabilities can also be used in a hybrid environment or just to protect your on-premises resources, right? So again, this is not a just cloud-only approach. Zero Trust is also for those who have limited cloud capabilities, right? You're leveraging the best of suite, I would even say, not the best of breed, but you're leveraging a very sensible approach. So one thing that is important when you're building out or when you're securing your environment is that you make it an end-to-end integrated solution, right? Just buying solutions or buying features or using random features to secure your environment no longer makes the cut. Getting a best-of-breed anti-malware solution or an EDR solution and then connecting it or not connecting it into your SIEM solutions or having a disjointed firewall solution, all of which you have to manage independently of one another, will make things harder for you. So the approach that we've historically taken to go for best of breed is slowly but surely getting obsolete, where it's better to move towards a best of suite solution, where everything, all the security solutions and capabilities that you're using to secure your modern workplace are tightly and easily integrated with one another. Now, Admittedly, do you get the best of everything when taking that approach? Probably not. Are you going to get the best EDR solution ever? No. Are you going to get the best SIEM? No. It also depends on what your definition of best is at that point in time. But the goal is to make sure that all these products work together. And I'm sure that many of you have lived through the problem where you've had Windows and then a vendor came in and said, oh, we're gonna sell you an EDR or an antivirus solution. And then you started integrating it into Windows and you had 250,000 agents on the machine, which slow down the machine. And then you have to upgrade Windows, and that creates all sorts of other problems. And that also creates certain vulnerabilities, right? So making sure that everything works together is crucially important. And the better they work together, the better they integrate together, the better your end state will be and your security will be, or your security posture of your workplace will be. Now, this being said, let's take a look at how to do that and what to do first, right? The approach there is distilled from various frameworks. Obviously, there's a NIST framework, there's PCI DSS, there's ISO frameworks, all of which they tell you what you have to do, right? But in the end, it comes down to 3 simple steps, right? Protect, detect, respond. I'm pretty sure you've heard about this throughout the week. And my take on the protect, detect, respond pieces is really depending on your ICT maturity level. Now, what is maturity level is how proficient are you with implementing security, running your IT organization? How many people do you have? It's not just about knowledge, it's also about capability or ability to execute, right? If you are a very mature ICT organization with well-established procedures, you've got resources to actually do everything, then it makes sense to go to the full Monty. But a lot of organizations are just starting their journey. They have, just a couple of guys working IT. They're probably overworked. They're trying to keep up with change in the cloud, with the business requirements. And, they don't always have time to respond when something is happening in their environment. They don't always know if there is a hack or a virus or an attack going on. So these organizations are better off putting as much as they can in protecting their environment. And as they grow, move towards a scenario where they can leverage technologies to respond to it. It's basically, when someone has an environment to manage and they've got Windows 10 machines or even Windows 7, it's as if they would come and start implementing a SIEM solution without having a decent EDR. Does not make any sense at all. Yes, it's nice and shiny and great to have such things, but start with the basis, right? And we're going to cover the basics, obviously, as well. So first of all, right, step 1, as I mentioned, as I led off with, do not start doing just about anything. I love the message that Microsoft and others out there are putting out there and saying, enable MFA. Yes, true. It's hands down, we're going to talk about that. One thing you should do, right? We've been saying it for a lot of time, but not everyone's doing it. But yeah, but why are you doing MFA, right? There's a reason why you're doing it. Why are you implementing an EDR solution? Why are you doing data protection or doing DLP policies? There has to be a reason on why you're doing it. Doing it for the sake of doing it is not a great idea. Plus, it gets you into trouble afterwards because, in 2 years from now, someone might take over your job or you might have someone new entering the environment and they might look at your policies. And the first thing they'll say is, but why? Why is this configured this way? So documenting somewhere what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and why you're going to do it is equally important. Now, don't get me wrong. This doesn't have to be a book that you're writing explaining all the itty-bitty details. It just has to give you an idea of why you're implementing certain things, and it also gives you a sense of purpose and a roadmap on how to get where you want to go, where you need to go. Some environments do not need Azure Information Protection or data classification or encryption on their data, period. So do not spend time doing those things and focus on the things that really matter. But how do you know if you never gone through the exercise of understanding what your business needs are and what the threats are to your environment? So how do you do that, right? How do you start understanding what you're doing? Well, without becoming, a theoreticist, just create a matrix. List various threats, which could be DLP threats or actual cyber threats to your environment. Create a risk matrix, basically, impact, probability, and list the solutions that you may be using. And those solutions could be, like on screen, pretty much anything that is available to you. But if you don't have an M365 E5 license, for instance, then you just list which ones are available to you. And then obviously the available solutions will create a potential solution for you and will also leave you with what they call residual risk. And then it becomes a business decision, right? Then you can go back to management and tell them, okay, so we've got a problem, a threat to our organization, right? A DLP risk. This is how we could solve it today, and this is the problem, that still exists. These are the gaps that we still have. Are we protecting our environment adequately enough for you? If the answer is yes, great. The business just signed off on a residual risk, and they know what exposure they still have for that risk. It may be very well possible that the management comes back to you and says, no, we don't like this residual risk. Then your answer could be, well, we could solve it the other way, but we need budget, we need additional licenses, we need to step up from an E3 to an E5, for instance. But then you're having a discussion at a different level, right? At least it is funded and gives you a good idea. Now, we're not going to talk about the possible solutions for this specific threat. We're going to go through it when going through the different other steps. So step one is creating that plan. Now step two, and I know you've heard this before, right, as patch and update. The funny part is everyone says, yeah, we know we have to do this, but no one does, right? Every single customer I work with, and I'm sorry if they're listening, but they know I'm targeting them, they know, oh yeah, sure, we should update our Windows regularly, and we should patch and update our servers. But yet every single one of them either doesn't have methods to do so, don't adequately do so, don't do that in a timely manner, or they don't patch their systems. Now, it is the single most best thing you can do, along with MFA, to secure your environment. Because a lot of the software that you use today, let's, for example, use Windows 7, has been created today, or this year, 10 years ago, in an era where that software was great, but things evolved. Windows 10, for instance, if we're really talking about the desktop, is capable of dealing with modern threats, has capabilities that respond to modern threats that older software doesn't do. But it's not just the operating system, right? We all understand why we need to go to Windows 10. It's about the software that you run on your devices. Whether that is Office or solutions from Adobe or other solutions, they need updates too. This week, the conference, I think, was it on Monday or was it last week? Critical vulnerability in Chrome. Things happen. Whenever code is written, bugs are created. Some of them are worse than others. But it means that you have to update your environment because that just became a liability to your environment. Yes, Windows may be up to date, but if you're running a component on top of your modern workplace that is insecure, you've just poked a hole in your security posture. And then anything you do may be part of securing your workplace, but you just poked a hole in it. So what's your security worth if you don't start with the basis, right? So making sure that you are up to date and that you have a plan and that you have the tools to enforce updates and updateness, I'd say, right, is great. Obviously, there are solutions on how to mitigate that. Instead of running the traditional Office deployment, run Office Pro Plus because it's almost self-maintaining. But that's great for Office. There's lots of other pieces that don't fit the auto-updating model, right? Third step, authentication. This is maybe a little bit geared towards the cloud, but authentication is critical. It identifies who you are and then ultimately leads to you being authorized to do certain things. Now, if your authentication scheme or solution or feature or whatever it is that you're using for authentication is insecure by default, then again, anything you do to secure the modern workplace, you may have the most secure laptop, the more secure device. If anyone can impersonate you by just using your credentials, you're hosed anyway, right? So sure, there's multiple layers of defense that you'll have to build in, and we're going to talk about device security later, but it starts there. So again, I'm reiterating a message that many people have said before, even this week, right? You're probably bored to death about this message. But legacy authentication, basic authentication, regular username and password is bad, period, right? It's not your fault. It's a lot of vendors' fault. A lot of third-party vendors are still using the legacy authentication. But that's the issue, right? It's because it hasn't been updated. So It's your responsibility to responsibilize, if that's even a word, the third-party vendors to make sure that they either update their software or you abandon them, or you go and search for alternatives. Now, a great alternative to not being able to deal with modern authentication is, for instance, the Azure AD app proxy. Right? There's legacy software running on premises, and rather than exposing it to the internet or some other way, if you expose it through the Azure AD app proxy, then you can leverage modern authentication to connect to an older application, even if it uses Kerberos constrained delegation. So that's a great solution. There's many ways to solve the problem of not being able to use or natively use modern authentication techniques. Now, there's another reason why you need modern authentication. It's not modern, let's just call it regular authentication. It's in order to be able to do stuff like multi-factor authentication. Now, I love MFA, but I hate MFA at the same time. I'm a user. I've had organizations in the past that says, yes, we're going to enable MFA every single time you log in. Great. Well, now you get the prompt fatigue. Every time they log in, they have to, yes, approve. Well, what'd you get? I have one customer where we did the exercise. We started logging in as users whose passwords were available on the internet. And yes, they had MFA enabled for those users, and they were sitting at home. And they got a notification. They just said, yeah, sure, I'm logging in. So we were able to compromise about 25% of the accounts by sending bogus MFA requests, and they would just approve them, even though they were not at the computer at that time. There's two problems, right? One that we've created ourselves, just MFA them without giving them some information. There's actually a third problem. Microsoft doesn't necessarily put on the MFA prompt, you are being prompted because you're trying to access this application from this location. It just says, someone's trying to authenticate, do you want to approve? So I think there is some additional help that we could use there. But thirdly, prompting every time is not a great idea. You should do it more intelligently, which we can do with conditional access, right? If you're coming from location X, Y, or Z, then I'm going to prompt you. Or even better, if your authentication request corresponds to a certain risk factor, right? I don't know the device that you're using. Your device is at risk. You're from a known bad location, or you're using an anonymous IP address, i.e. you're using a Tor browser. That's all things that contribute to risk, which I don't really like. So I'm going to prompt you for MFA because that's an additional proof of who you are. And maybe you're trying to do legitimate things, but you're just unlucky to be in a risky situation, potentially even without you noticing it. So there's a lot of little things that you can do to further improve the authentication and further secure your authentication on premises, in the cloud and on premises. Now, thirdly, or lastly, Azure ATP, right, is another great way of gaining visibility into what's happening on-prem. Whether we like it or not, we're moving slowly, surely, to a zero trust model, but we still have that legacy baggage that we're dragging behind us. And sure, a lot of organizations are looking into getting rid of the on-prem AD, but realistically speaking, if you've got legacy, chances are that you can't get rid of it in the next couple of years. Well, I've got news for you. A lot of the breaches that happen in the cloud, whether it's Microsoft's cloud or anywhere else, originate on premises. So that just became your Achilles heel of your secure modern workplace. It's not about the cloud anymore. It's about what you're doing on premises, opening up a hole in your deployment for the cloud. So you need to make sure that, first of all, it is maintained well, updated regularly, but you need to get visibility. And Azure ATP is a great way to understand what's happening there because it'll analyze the authentication requests on premises, and it will try and detect malicious actions, right? Lateral account movement, attacks on your Active Directory, whether it's brute force or whether it's disguised, or where someone is trying to elevate privileges where they shouldn't. They are all surfaced in Azure ATP. And the beauty of that is it is integrated with signals from the cloud so that you can immediately leverage capabilities in the cloud to automatically respond or detect when that's going on, right? So it helps you keep that legacy, which is your Achilles heel, more secure. So there's a lot of things that you can do. And the funny thing is, some of these things are easy. Just check mark, enable this. Like Azure ATP, when you come to think of it, it's installing an agent, registering that agent in a service. Basically, you're done. That's how easy it is. It's a quick win, right? Obviously, you need the right licenses, right? And which is a discussion that we're regularly having because not everyone has an M365 But think of it, right? When was the last time you had a solution that you could deploy in 10 minutes and keeps you secure or increases your security for 60, 70%? That's super easy. It's well worth considering, right? Step 4, covering your bases. Now, I know there's a lot of investments going on in Office 365 and Azure to make it secure by default, right? There's the security baselines, and there's some changes Microsoft are making to make sure that when you spin up a new tenant, some settings are secure by default. Now, the reality is that a lot of our organizations have had their tenant for many years, so they're still operating, or they're potentially still operating off of default settings that were, secure or default a couple of years back. And that in itself makes a potential security risk. I'll give you an example. The Azure AD app registrations allowed for users. This is funny, right? Because security is not about disallowing people to do things. Security is there to enable people to do things in a secure way, right? It's a very different approach. I know that traditionally security has or security people have the tendency to say, no, you can't use this because it is insecure. I'd rather take the approach of, okay, you want to do this? Let's see how we can make sure that you can do that securely. Now, the app registrations are a little bit in between, in a gray zone. App registrations allow a user to consent an application to start consuming their own data. So it's a risk on a personal level, right? A regular user cannot authorize an application to use everything in a tenant, which is fine. Now, imagine that your users are not tech savvy, or they've not had the required lessons or change management or awareness training on what it means to consent an application. And all of a sudden, they try and connect a third-party application that says, hey, we need to, you need to click OK and I accept here for us to be able to give you a certain functionality. Boomerang in Outlook, for instance, is one of them. Very popular, very great tool. Find Time is another one, right? Where you need to consent that application to read your email. Well, what if I would create such an application that appears to be coming from a legitimate source, tries to read and write to your data, and I'm abusing that access to start encrypting your information? That's a scary thought, right? It has happened. There is malware, it's not malware. There are malicious actors out there that are abusing this OAuth grant to encrypt data in your email. Now, I don't want to scare you. It's low probability, high risk, right? So from a risk perspective, it's something you have to look at. And the app registrations, by turning them off, you ensure your users can do that. But at the same time, by turning off the app registrations at a user level, you're not allowing them to use Find Time like this. They'll have to go through IT and have to approve, and IT has to approve and assign them to the application before they can use it. So there is a downside. So before turning it off, communicate it clearly. Make sure that you have processes in place so that people know where to request access to those applications. And don't just go haywire and tell them, no, you can't. We're going to turn it off and give you no means to actually get these applications up and running. But it's also about other stuff like Exchange Online. Still, by default, opens up POP, IMAP, and SMTP. Now, I really wonder how many of you here in the room actually actively use POP and IMAP for their mailbox. Great, no one. Why is it on by default? Seriously, it shouldn't be, right? So there's two ways of dealing with it. Whatever mailboxes you have in your environment, go back and disable these protocols for these mailboxes because you've just reduced your attack surface. At the same time, the mailbox plan, which is used to determine which protocols are automatically activated whenever a new mailbox is created in the environment, updated so that the default settings are to, by default, block POP and IMAP and even SMTP if you don't need direct SMTP access. And you've just shrunk your attack surface. And there's a couple of things, like guest access, being able to invite other guests, which is very popular amongst attackers because they get in some way, right? And then they start inviting other members in your environment. And if you haven't restricted access to guests in, for instance, teams, they can potentially even elevate their own access rights within a team, invite more people, and get multiple accounts. And it becomes harder for you to fence off who, or to understand who has access in your environment and which one of these guest accounts are actually legitimate. Again, it's not always a problem, right? It really depends on your own environment, but those are things to think of, right? Those are the default settings that you have to look into and understand. Is it a risk to my environment? What can I do about it? Maybe user awareness training is what you need, and you cannot turn it off, but at least make sure that you do the awareness training and you tell people, really importantly, hey, this is what you have to look for. Please do review all the permissions that you're granting these third-party applications. Step 5, Office ATP. Going to make a bold statement, right? If your email is in the cloud or even on premises, right? Using EOP, Exchange Online Protection, without ATP today, in my opinion, is no longer sufficient. With all the types of attacks that exist, right? With a increased focus of attackers on phishing, right? Not having an additional layer or an additional feature of intelligence on top of default mail filtering exposes you to a whole scenario of threats. So by having Office 365 ATP, you have that additional layer, right? Anti-phishing, anti-spoofing, but also post-breach, where if you can prevent from phishing emails to come into your environment, at least you have features like smart links or safe attachments and safe links that will keep you safe, that will prevent users from clicking through. And interestingly enough, right, that still isn't enough. I'm not sure if you've noticed, but over the past couple of months, I personally, I do have Office ATP in all my tenants. I noticed an increase of phishing emails getting through. Reality is these phishing attacks are getting more and more complex to stop when they first happen. Those are campaigns that are well designed, well thought out by the attackers, and even Microsoft, needs a little bit of data and a little bit of time to detect these attacks and then adequately protect them. And yes, it means that once in a while a phishing email will get through. And there is no 100% prevention. It's not just Microsoft, it's everywhere. So taking a look at the metrics of some of my customers, we see that there is a pretty high click-through rate. I mean, that Nigerian prince is very successful for some reason, especially when he carries my own name. I wish it was true, but the problem is that you cannot predict what people are going to do, right? Some people have had awareness training. Some emails are really easy to determine that they're spoofed or that they're actual phishing emails, but others aren't. So can you be mad at your users for, clicking a link, clicking through? So making sure that you have safe links there is really important. But even then, safe links doesn't always protect. When an email just gets in, like let's say I live in my email all day, I get a phishing attack, one of the, let's call it a zero-day phishing attack that gets through Office 365 ATP. And I immediately click the link as soon as it gets in. Maybe Smart Links hasn't been able to process the entire email at that point in time. Maybe my settings said, I will allow users to click through to the original URL before scanning has been complete. And maybe they got to the same website. Well, if you don't have anything else on top of Office 365 ATP, you may just have a malware or a malicious code running in your environment, right? So it also shows the necessity of having this, but it also shows that there's limitations to this. Now imagine that you do not have anti-phishing, anti-spoofing, or safe attachments and safe links. Then you're in a much worse state. Now, in addition to Office 365 ATP, you get the automated investigations, which are really super cool. Whenever someone says, hey, this is a phishing message, or I believe it is, then that machine system kicks off, does investigation, goes through the log files internally at Microsoft, and gives you as an administrator more visibility into what's happening. Now, that's important. That's important to me as an administrator of my environment, so I can always go back and look and see, has there been a phishing campaign? What did the environment do? Did it detect? Did it remove the message? And this is one of the things where I believe Microsoft has a golden solution, ZAP, zero-hour auto-purge. Whenever something malicious comes into your environment, ZAP can actually go back to that message and zap it out of the mailbox, take it out. If you use a third-party solution, which is not integrated, remember about integrated solutions? All it can do is tell you, I'm sorry, I missed it earlier, but it's still in the mailbox, and I can't go into the mailbox and take it out anymore. Right? EOP and Office ATP can. Mobile device management, or device management in general. Really, really important. And why is that? Well, from a zero trust perspective, we consider any device connecting into the environment to be insecure by default. So we need to ensure that whenever something connects and tries to get access to our data, it needs to be validated, right? We may not keep it secure, we may not have control over it, but at least we need to have some visibility. Enrolling devices in a device management solution, in this case, it still says Intune, but mobile Microsoft Endpoint Manager, Intune piece, ensures that you can get data of the device, and if it's a fully enrolled device, you can even push updates and have more control. So it starts by making sure that these devices are co-managed and rolled into whatever your approach is to device management, and then defining compliance policies, right? First of all, what is a compliant device? When or what are my criteria that I will use to determine whether or not I will allow a device into my environment? Now, I don't believe there is a one-size-fits-all approach there. I don't think that, that just saying any device that is enrolled and that is up to date is safe. I think you should be able to let BYOD devices maybe connect to email without the ability to download email, right? Just maybe give those BYOD devices access to OA with the disability to download attachments from OMA so that they can view emails. That's one valid solution to provide people with access. And again, it comes down to not preventing them to access email, but give them access in a secure way. And then if they need a higher level of access, let's say they need to get into Teams, then they should be able to prove that they use a managed device which has the latest anti-malware updates that is known to the environment, and so forth and so on. So the list of criteria grows as access to more sensitive data is requested, or as access to more sensitive applications is requested. That way you get a granular approach without locking out everyone or without having to control everything. Plus, if you're from Europe, like I am, a lot of organizations run into the issue where people have their personal mobile device, and they would just say, no, you're not managing this device. It's mine. I will allow you to control the data that you have on my device, but I'm not allowing you to control my device. Which is why app protection policies are great, because you don't need to control the device. You can just tell them, OK, great. You're going to connect through Outlook mobile on your mobile device into Exchange Online. Data will be encrypted. We control that piece of the device, but nothing else. Right? This is where we see a trend in the industry. Apple, with the user enrollment kind of thing, is moving towards that as well, where there's a much higher segregation of personal data versus what the organization can see and can control. I'd even go as far as saying that I, as an organization, I don't want to control personal devices at all because it opens me up to a whole lot of liability. The more I know about your personal device, the more I get into a legal gray zone. Because imagine that I can see you doing stuff that you shouldn't be doing on your device, then now, theoretically, from a legal perspective, I need to report it. But at the same time, I wasn't supposed to know all these things in the first place. So by reporting it, I'm admitting that I did something I shouldn't have done. And by not reporting it, I'm putting myself into the legal gray zone where I should have reported it. So it's a lose-lose situation. And we see this happening more and more where legislation is not up to par with modern threats and technologies and what's happening. So again, right, if it's corporate-owned device, I pay for the device, I give it to you, probably is fair game. But with personally owned devices, a much more moderate approach where you allow them to do some things, but maybe not everything, is something well worth considering. And then at the end, I mentioned autopilot, right? Deploying the devices. Why? Well, it kind of comes down to making sure that you've got a standardized approach, that everyone has your quote-unquote golden image. It's not really a golden image, but it is deployed in the way that you want it to. The applications that you need are on there. It's automatically enrolled and joined to Azure AD or hybrid Azure AD joined. Has Intune management on there. And from there, you can ensure that the device is in the state that you want it to be to allow it to have access to your environment. Endpoint protection, Microsoft Defender ATP. For the very simple reason, A, it rocks, and B, it's integrated with pretty much everything. Azure ATP, Cloud App Security, it has built-in threat and vulnerability management, which, when we get back to step 2, make sure that you update and patch your environment. TVM in Defender ATP is epic. It gives you that visibility, understanding what applications are running on my devices, which ones of them are out of date, and what is the risk exposure level of these devices. A lot of people look at Defender ATP and think antivirus. Well, yeah, it's just a small part of what you need. It's a really great antivirus, anti-malware EDR solution, but it's everything else on top of that that makes it so great. Plus, if you take a look at the past couple of years, it's consistently scoring #1 or top 3 in the anti-malware performance results. It is really, really good. There's still a lot of bias because the name Defender in the early days, let's just admit it wasn't great. It's less than great even. It was less great. It isn't today, right? It's well worth considering. And if you've got a Windows E5, hey, there you go. You've got Defender ATP available to you. It's probably, in addition to making sure that you're up to date, the single most thing you can do to boost your security posture through the roof and get some peace of mind. So again, this is really something to look into. We've gone through a number of steps to secure the environment, right? To protect it from threats externally coming into the environment or even internal threats. What's next? Well, we're now moving from a low security perspective or a low maturity level into a, well, we're well protected. Let's move one step beyond. Let's do something with the data that we have. I'm not sure if you realize, but once you move to a modern workplace, you have so much intelligence, so much information at hand, yet so many of us just ignore that data. It's a gold mine. And not just a gold mine for harvesting it, for selling it off and doing stuff with that, right? It's a gold mine to keep your environment secure, right? If you do not have any of the advanced licenses, I'd say, right? P2 licenses, EMSE5 and so forth and so on, just go to security.microsoft.com. Information you're getting there from a SecOps perspective, it's not really SecOps, but it gives you so much visibility into what's going on with the user account and the threats that are happening at that point in time. But even if we take it one step further, right? Using Azure Monitor to pull in the Azure AD logs to create an alert on certain things that you see, to create a dashboard with failed sign-ins or with authentication behavior is super useful. Whenever I go in any environment that doesn't have any of this and just show them the Azure AD workbook in Azure Monitor, people are baffled. They're like, oh, I didn't know there were that many login attempts from China or wherever. It's just super useful to know what's happening, but it also allows you to change the conversation with management, telling them, well, I know it's always been a struggle to get a little bit of budget, but here, proof. Whatever we did is actually keeping us safe from 1,000,001 different attempts on basic authentication from China or other places. Oh, and by the way, they're trying to hit IMAP. We disabled IMAP earlier, so good for us. We did the right things. It gives you that visibility. Let's step it up one notch. Cloud App Security is no longer just looking at the data, but allows you to act upon the signals that you're getting in. It allows you to set up alert policies that will automatically kick off a workflow. In Flow, for instance, right? It will automatically allow you to disable a user account if there is a certain threat that you found. Whenever I get to a customer that has the licenses for Cloud App Security, one of the things I go in and do immediately is set up an alert policy for specific accounts. Whether we like it or not, a lot of third-party tools need a service account with, for instance, global admin permissions to log into the tenant just because it's the way it is, right? They can't use a service principal, or the service principals don't give them the necessary permissions they have, or it's just badly written, but you're stuck to it because it runs a business process. Well, in that case, Cloud App Security allows you to set up an activity rule, says, whenever this account logs in from an IP address that is not within my corporate network, and you can define those IP addresses, send me an alert, and it'll send you an SMS message. So I use this for all my break loss accounts. I've got 2 in my tenant, right? Whenever that break loss account is used, regardless of its location, I get a text message immediately. And because I'm the only one knowing the password, I know, oops, something's wrong. Now, I need to know that. Why? Because that break loss account is also a global admin. That's a tough thing, right? And now it's automated, right? I immediately get notified about, hey, that account is in use. So instead of being reactive, where you notice something's wrong, you go to the logs, you said, that account was used and it wasn't me, and you go in and try and repair something, you now have an automated workflow that alerts you, or even blocks the logging attempt if it's outside of your corporate network. The same is true for Sentinel, but it spans even much more than what Cloud App Security can do. It can take the data from various sources, Azure Portal, or Azure in general, Office 365 activity, Cloud App Security, Azure ATP, Defender ATP, and use that information to, first of all, create an alert and let you know something's off. Second of all, kick off a workflow, which can be more advanced than just Flow, right? Because Azure Sentinel integrates with logic apps. It allows you to define if then do this. If I get this alert, I'll give you an example, right? I get an alert for an impossible travel activity. Right? That's a pesky alert, because I get a lot of them, especially because there's a lot of people traveling in my organization. But the system is designed to look at, well, are these people traveling? And if it's short time span, then it may be malicious. But the problem is when I get on a plane in Brussels and I fly over to New York and I open up my phone, immediately it says, here is an impossible travel alert. Now you may explain to someone can maybe explain to me why that is impossible because I just did it physically, right? But I'm happy the system detected that I was in Brussels, I'm now in New York, and it's preventing me to access. So what I did is I have identity protection with a risk level that says, well, if that happens, trigger MFA and you're done. Great. Well, through Azure Sentinel, I can even go one step beyond. Right now, I'm in Orlando. My out of office says Michael is in Orlando. So what if I would take an alert coming into Azure Sentinel, create a playbook on top of it that says, whenever you get an impossible travel alert, figure out where that alert is coming from. If the alert says, we've got a sign-in from Orlando, go and fetch the out of office from Michael and read in the out of office if there is any mention of the word Orlando. If that happens, fair chance that Michael is actually in Orlando. I'm going to dismiss it for now. And if the alert keeps coming back 20 times, maybe I should look into that deeper. But I've just created an intelligent solution that tells me, well, dismiss these, right? Now, at the same time, the same workflow can prevent me from being insecure because I'm in Orlando, and if there is a sign-in from Russia, then obviously something's off because I shouldn't be there. Maybe I'm using a VPN that I shouldn't be using, but at least it adds some intelligence. And this is what you can do with these integrated solutions. You can build interesting stuff to help you do stuff without being the super expert on certain things. Let's move into data security, right? Data security is tough because how do you secure data? There's 1,000,001 ways. DLP policies are great, and those are the ones that you should start using early on, right? And we all know the examples of credit card numbers and bank card account numbers and national identity numbers or social security numbers. Great. But what if you wanted to do a DLP rule on none of those, right? What if you have unstructured data? That is so hard. DLP is great for anything that's structured and that has, it's the same over and over. But if the data that you're submitting or that you're trying to protect changes every time you send it, and there is nothing that no regular expression whatsoever to detect what you're trying to send, then you've got two more options. First of all, it's a well-established communication stream, right, that you need to protect, i.e., I'm emailing my lawyer, therefore it's sensitive. Even if I'm just trying to ask him, hey, how are you doing, right? It's a one-size-fits-all approach. It's a blanket approach where that communication between Michael and his lawyer is always going to be encrypted, for instance, with Office message encryption. That's one way of dealing with it. Or we're going to apply an Azure Information Protection template. That's another approach. A much smarter approach would be to understand, what are you trying to do? What is the data that you're working with? And that's where classification comes in. Now, AIP allows you to both classify and protect at the same time. The classification piece is really important. There are solutions to automatically classify data through Cloud App Security, through the AIP scanner, through AIPP2, where it detects what's happening in a document and adds a classification label. But it's much more about user awareness, telling them, hey, whenever you deal with this type of information, classify this, label 1, 2, 3, whatever the labels are that you have. And because you just classified, not yet secured the data, you can now go into Cloud App Security. You can go into a Mailflow rule. You can go into Defender ATP and use Windows Information Protection to protect the data on the device while it's going. You can actually do something with it. Knowing the data that you're trying to protect helps you to protect the data. Once you've gone past classification, then monitor whether or not it meets the business requirements, the business processes that you're trying to protect, and only then step up to let's start encrypt the data. Because encryption is quite definitive. Once it's encrypted, it means only you and I can look at the data, or whomever has been granted access to the data. But one thing I've noticed is that encryption through AIP, for instance, is not super flexible. If I've got a document that today I'm sending to this gentleman and tomorrow to that gentleman and the day after to that gentleman, and the audience keeps changing, either I have to update the classification each time, or I have to update the rules each time. It just doesn't work really well. And that's where you have to be much more smarter about how you apply that protection. And then lastly, and I deliberately put it last, is Cloud App Security. The thing about cloud app security is it can do so much, right? It goes beyond your own modern workplace. It allows you to protect data living in other cloud systems, right? But also within your own cloud system, it's the one thing that allows you to do smart things. It can look at the activity logs. It can look at what you're trying to do. So if you funnel a session in Teams, in SharePoint, in Outlook Web App, through the Cloud App Security proxy infrastructure, then you can take a look at what is that person trying to do. Are they trying to download something? Then maybe you want to do a step-up authentication where you require them to do MFA. Or maybe you just want to prevent downloads. You want to give them access to everything, but just don't download if they're coming from an unmanaged device. The intelligence, right, to step in while it is happening is what you can do at in Cloud App Security. Now, this is typically not something that you will start with, right? Coming into an environment and that hasn't done any of the steps before, and then just saying, let's do and proxying through Cloud App Security and start, protecting stuff is doable, but it's not a very sensible approach. Now, those were our 10 steps. What you need to understand about these 10 steps is they're worth nothing if you do not explain your users why you're doing them, how you're doing them, what alternatives there are. Adoption, change management, awareness is super critical. We mentioned phishing earlier. Well, you'll be subject to phishing attacks regardless if you don't tell your people what to look out for, because technology only covers 90-something%. The rest is for your users. I cannot stress this enough. Multi-factor authentication, it's the same thing. Just rolling it out and tell them, here, use your authenticator app, without explaining them whenever you get an alert or a pop-up that says, please allow, think, are you doing something on your computer? Did you just trigger an authentication? And then tell them, if you didn't, click no. And maybe they'll get a pop-up screen on their computer at that point in time. Well, they can just try again and click yes the next time. But make sure that you inform them about all the controls you have so they understand. Make them part of the solution rather than keep them out of the solution. So just to recap, create a plan, patch and update, secure the authentication, cover your bases, protect from phishing, Office ATP. Manage the devices, or at least control what you're doing them, or get visibility into them. Endpoint detection, response. On mobile even, right? It's not just Windows. Could be any other device as well. We've got Defender ATP for Mac. Look out on mobile devices that integrates natively with Intune. You can do an end-to-end solution, right? It can be an integrated solution. Detect and respond. Use the information that's in the cloud to secure your modern workplace, right? Leverage it in an intelligent way to help you keep your environment secure without having to have a whole team doing all that stuff for you. Think about data security, DLP, classification. Use the technologies that you have to understand what the data is that you're working with, and then use that classification to secure your data. And last but not least, take a look at Cloud App Security to do parts of what we've discussed to keep your data secure, to get more visibility. Defender ATP gives so much information about which cloud applications you're using in your environment so that you know what you're dealing with, so that you can more adequately secure your environment. And lastly, do not forget about user awareness and adoption throughout the entire journey. Take them with you on that journey from step 1 to step 10, and I guarantee you, you'll be better off. This being said, sorry for running over time, but it's a thing I have. I really appreciate you sticking around for the last session. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I hope to see you next year at Ignite again. Thank you so much.